Delphine Software International may not be a name instantly recognizable to young gamers, but to us slightly old hats, the name was part of our childhood. This video looks into the formation of the company, every game they developed, and ultimately their demise in a concise manner. Timestamps are available in the description below. The company was founded in 1988 by Paul de Senneval and one of gaming's unsung heroes, Paul Cuisset. Delphine Software was the video game arm of Paul de Senneval's music company, Delphine Records. The name comes from his eldest daughter, Delphine Deschat. In 1989, just a year after the formation, Delphine released their first video game, Castle Warrior, a sort of Zork imagined as an Ultima Underworld in a third-person view dungeon crawler. The game is notable in the fact that it was one of the first video games that composer Jean Baudelot worked on, a recurring name in the timeline of the company. Having a unique control system, the character moved vertically automatically. Your aim is to kill the enemies that appear on screen. Their next game was Bio Challenge, a side-scrolling beat-em-up that features some rather fantastic backgrounds and animations. The plot is bizarre enough. Set in the future, the human gene code has become weaker with each passing generation, necessitating the creation of a RoboCop-esque creation. The game features a day-night cycle and some excellent character animations. Also, Jean Baudelot returns to compose the soundtrack. Their third game, Future Wars, was released in the same year as their two previous titles, and featured a then relatively unknown Eric Chahi. One of the more famous names associated with the company, Eric Chahi's graphical contributions to Future Wars was but a taste of his skills as a video game designer. The game's striking production and atmosphere clearly set the stage for the company's subsequent two biggest titles. In all, Future Wars proved to be a hit for the company, and is now considered a classic in the point-and-click adventure genre. Hot off the success of Future Wars, Paul Cuisset and the team got hard at work on their next title, Operation Stealth. Inspired by the espionage world of 007, you play as the titular agent who has been assigned to locate the eponymous stealth plane. Operation Stealth is a visually pleasing game with some splendid segments, my two favorites being when you access the briefcase and the watercolor-esque animation of the sea waves. Jean Baudelot once again returned to score the game's fantastic soundtrack. Who did not return, however, was Eric Chahi. Given the opportunity to work on Operation Stealth or program his own video game, he opted for the latter, citing the unlimited freedom he now had to pursue his personal vision. Over the next 2 years, Eric Chahi worked as a one-man crew, doing all the visual design, rotoscoping, sound effects, and programming all by himself.
De simplicité et de rapidité de programmation. Alors ça permettait d'éditer, de tracer des polygones. Ça, c'est la canette qui a servi au décapsulage.
The music this time around was composed by Jean-François Freitas, an excellent blend of hollow synth pop that blends very well against the minimal and bleak atmosphere of the game. The game is a cinematic platformer in which you play as Lester, a scientist who is unwittingly transported into an alien world and must fight for his survival. The game features little to no dialogue, instead relying on heavy atmospheric ambience to drive the story. Many things influence the audio-visual feel of Another World, namely, the fantastical paintings of Michael Whelan. Speedlines and Kamehameha from mangas such as Dragon Ball, blasters from Star Wars, fluid gameplay of Prince of Persia and Dragon's Lair, and the soundtrack of Back to the Future. Published by Delphine Software in 1991, Another World was met with unanimous critical acclaim. To say the game was influential would be an understatement. Designers such as Suda51, the eccentric mastermind behind Killer 7, Fumito Ueda of ICO fame, Hideo Kojima, famed auteur behind the Metal Gear Solid franchise, and Keiichiro Toyama, creator of Silent Hill, all cite the game as inspirations for their personal creations. But perhaps the greatest accolade the game received was being selected by the Museum of Modern Arts as part of their permanent collection.
Choosing Eric Chailly's wonderful Another World, amongst others, we put together a panel of experts and we worked on this acquisition, and it's mostly myself.
Delphine Software released yet another point-and-click title not too long after. Helmed by familiar names such as Philippe Chastel, Benoit Aaron, Paul Cuisset, and Jean Baudelot, Cruise for a Corpse puts you in the gumshoes of Raoul Dusentier, a French police inspector investigating a maritime murder. Inspired by the writings of Agatha Christie, Cruise is perfect for those who love to solve puzzles. It even has all the hallmarks of a classic Delphine game, splendid visuals, fun gameplay, and excellent music to boot. Around this time, Eric Chailly had long left the company to form his own, called Amazing Studio. While he was busy developing another cinematic platformer, Paul Cuisset and team would release what would later come to be acknowledged as the company's magnum opus, Flashback. Set in the futuristic sci-fi world of 2142, Flashback puts you in the control of Conrad B. Hart, an agent of the Galaxia Bureau of Investigation who has discovered a sinister secret involving shape-shifting aliens called morphs. Conrad is quickly kidnapped by said aliens and has his memories erased, but not before he made a backup of his memories and sent it away for safekeeping. You spend the rest of the game retrieving your memories and uncovering more of the morphs' plans. Stylistically and narratively, Flashback borrows a lot of inspiration from 80s and 90s sci-fi movies such as Total Recall, Running Man, and They Live. Furthermore, the vehicular and architectural language seemed to be influenced by the works of Douglas Trumbull, Sid Mead, and Chris Foss. Flashback was released in 1992 to instant critical and commercial success, with several outlets praising its realistic animations and atmosphere. It was also listed by the Guinness World Book of Records as the best-selling French video game of all time. Their next outing, lamentably, wasn't as noteworthy. In fact, quite the opposite. Now, at this point in the video gaming timeline, that being 1994, sports and fighting titles were very popular in the market. Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter were proving to be exceptionally successful, as were sports titles with notable names on the cover. Delphine combined the two. Enter Shaq Fu. Shaquille O'Neal has always been kind of a big deal in the world of basketball. He was at his peak in the 90s, making multiple appearances in movies and video games, with Shaq Fu being one of the earliest. The game strays heavily from Delphine's established record of making point-and-click and cinematic platform titles. Shaq Fu is a fighting game very much in the vein of Mortal Kombat. The story follows the titular character fighting his way through another dimension in order to rescue his friend. To say the game has had an interesting legacy would be putting it mildly. Despite receiving a mixed reception upon release, with most of the praise going to its art style and animation, Shaq Fu has now come to be widely regarded as one of the worst video games ever made. It even inspired the creation of a website dedicated solely to the complete destruction of every copy ever made. Even with a failure on their hands, Delphine displayed a sense of equanimity. Their 1995 release, Fade to Black, is testament to that. Set immediately after the events of Flashback, you once again play as Conrad, and once again must fight off the morph invasion. A sharp contrast to its 2D prequel, Fade to Black replaces pixels with polygonal 3D. No longer relegated to movement on the X and Y axis, Conrad can now traverse 360 degrees from a third-person perspective in a 3D world. The shift to 3D amplifies the core feeling of the two games, that of being trapped in something philosophically and figuratively bigger than yourself. Released to a mostly positive response, Fade to Black garnered praise for its animations and atmosphere, though it failed to match its predecessor's level of success. An interesting thing to note is the box art was designed by legendary comic artist Jean Mobius Girard. For this section, let's break chronology and talk about Darkstone first, the only title from Delphine's library that I'm personally not much familiar with. Inspired by major titles from the then-nascent isometric RPG genre, namely Diablo and Baldur's Gate, Darkstone is a chunky 3D fantasy adventure. The game features 8 distinct character classes to choose from. Once you pick your adventurer, you embark on a quest to defeat the great draconic evil that is Drac. Being too young to properly understand RPGs at the time, and with the game being released in the same year as the seminal Planescape Torment, it's little wonder why Darkstone totally flew under my radar. What didn't fly under my radar, however, were the excellent Moto Racer games, my introduction to the company and the catalyst for the making of this video. The 90s were awash with excellent arcade-style racers. These games are distinguished by their usually colorful graphics, ludicrous sense of speed, and casual disregard of physics. The original Moto Racer stands shoulder to shoulder among the greats. Moto Racer is so arcade, it hurts. The PC version's menu is decidedly ostentatious. Colorful production, charming entry screen, the Mistral typeface, shatter effects, chunky 3D polygonal bike models, eclectic soundtrack. There's very little not to love about the menu screen. During races, you can perform wheelies to speed up and shoot ahead of the competition. The sense of speed and decent controls is what sells the fantastic gameplay, not to mention the colorful and lively presentation of the tracks. Delphine Software followed Moto Racer with 4 sequels: Moto Racer 2, Moto Racer World Tour, Moto Racer 3, and Moto Racer Advance. 2 and World Tour are satisfactory enough racers for the PlayStation 1. Though they indeed lack the bubbly charm of the original, all the other hallmarks are present, and the gameplay is just as entertaining. 3, certainly the most nostalgic to me, is, in my view, the best from the Delphine-produced titles. The motocross events in particular stand out the most and where my fondest memories lie. All installments feature MX bikes, but controlling them feels just right in this one. Moto Racer Advance, developed in conjunction with ElevenLabs Software, was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2002, with Ubisoft acting as publishers this time around. To say this title is a hidden gem would be an understatement. It is easily among the top racers on the handheld. The gameplay is robust, the visual fidelity is impressive for the time, and the sound effects are neat. The 21st century wasn't very kind to Delphine Software International. They existed briefly in the 2000s, and it was tumultuous. 2002 saw them being removed from the Delphine Group. 2003 saw them being acquired by another French game development company, Doki Denki, who later declared bankruptcy in 2004. As a result, Delphine Software International was shut down, leaving behind a slew of unfinished games in their demise. To know more, the website of Thierry Levaster, who worked on several Delphine titles as a designer and animator, has a lot of interesting behind-the-scenes documents and early footage. Delphine Software International had a short but memorable run in the video game industry. Their chance of making an impression was cut short, but it was deep. Games like Future Wars, Another World, Flashback, and Fade to Black are proof that art and games need not be two separate things.